Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and today we have a friend of the channel in JT Sports joining us. Make sure before we get started to check out his page. You can search him up on Twitter, YouTube at JT Sports. Give him a follow, give him a subscription, hit his notification bell, and also if you haven't already, please like our video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we have more guest appearances, when we talk more about college football, whether it's from my perspective as an individual or in more of a conversational setting like me and JT or the other guests like Juck on Bucks or Chris Drew or Baldfather Betts that we've had before on the channel and other future guests. You will not want to miss any of that. So hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below, like the video, and watch it all the way through. How are you doing, JT?
Man, I'm doing awful, Sam. It's another weekend without football. I don't know what the hell to do with myself. If it wasn't for you having me on here tonight, I don't know what I would have done with my night.
Yeah, I do. I miss football, but I will also say that with how long the season was, like going into late January, started late August, I think that there are some people who understandably have the feeling that we just needed a break and needed things to settle. But I'm already building my all Big Ten team. I've researched most of the Big Ten staffs. I'm going to start doing that for the SEC and the ACC and really get content rolling. So I'm excited for the 2025 season already. I'm ready for football to be back. A team that I want to talk about because you're a fan of them and want to start out with is a team that hasn't been back for quite some time in Miami. And they were a team that I thought made major strides in some ways in 2024 compared to 2023 and 2022 under Cristobal. But they still had bad losses. They still had an entire side of the football and the defense that wasn't functional at all, really, for the talent that they had. And while Cam Ward was elite at the end of the day, well, he was only there for a year. He was only going to be there for a year. So I want to get your thoughts on the 2024 season, and I also want to start off with areas of improvement that you noticed and an optimistic feel of the program, and then we'll get into the pessimistic feel later.
For starters, this is the most talented that Miami football has ever been since the early 2000s with the influx of NIL cash that they've been allowed to spend and recruiting and the transfer portal. Easily, Miami is the most talented team in the ACC. They've out-recruited Clemson. They've out-recruited basically the majority of this conference. And believe it or not, the ACC only has a handful of teams that recruit at the top 25 level consistently.
Yeah.
The gap between Miami and the rest of this conference, talent-wise, is separating on a pretty big margin. Mario Cristobal went 10-3 last season. One of the better seasons that Miami has had in a very long time. It's the second 10-win season they've had in a while since Mark Richt had that peak year with Malik Rozier and that great defense. And then I like Mario's ability to be willing to make changes. At Oregon, he was known to be stubborn. He was hesitant to adapt. Now, when things aren't working, Mario doesn't hold on to it. He doesn't say, let me give this dude one more year.
Yeah,
nope.
He fires people.
Exactly. He got rid of Josh Gaddis really fast.
Immediately.
He was the Jim Boyles Award winner. Wasn't he coming from Michigan?
Yeah,
so you fire him, you fire Lance Guidry. So I give Mario Cristobal a lot of props for his willingness to make changes and not hesitate to do it fast.
Yeah, Gaddis should have never won the Broyles Award. Just a little interruption. He should have never won that. That should have went to Todd Monken that year or Mike McDonald defensively from Michigan. It should have never went to Gaddis. Never. He's terrible. Terrible.
And his offense was completely terrible. That's why when Mario fired him, he said, you know what? Bump all that old school pro style mumbo jumbo. I'm going to modernize. I'm going to get an air raid guy. He gets Shannon Dawson. And Shannon Dawson has been the second best offensive coordinator Miami has had since Rhett Lashley. So overall, with the recruiting, how well of a coaching staff Mario Cristobal has assembled, the NIL money that he's allowed to use, Miami is in a position to compete, not just to win the ACC title, but potentially a national championship down the road. You're now getting to that point where the talent is stacking so much. Eventually, you're going to get to a point where, if not this year, when? You feel me?
Exactly. I think that they've done a good job stacking talent in high school, in the portal. They have, when you look at their combined portal and recruiting acquisitions, they're second to none in the ACC. Like, they are number one. It's clear. Moving forward, they are going to be, after this season, easily the most talented ACC team. Clemson entering this year because of how old they are, and they still have a ton of blue chippers and 5-stars on their team that return after a 10-4 ECC champion team in 2024. They might technically be the most talented for 2025, but in the long-term outlook, they're not recruiting well. I mean, they just accepted a very tiny class that was barely top 25, and I still think that Dabo Swinney isn't using the portal enough. I give him props for using it a little bit, getting some nice players, but Miami has been much bolder. They've made better moves, and on top of that, I wonder if you agree with this or not. I think they've done a fairly good job developing. They're not just recruiting top 10 classes and wasting them all away. I feel like they're building towards something. No?
Mario Cristobal does a better job of developing talent than what he's given credit for. Elijah Ororo, he was a high school recruit that is going to be a pretty high draft pick. He'll probably go within the first couple of rounds. And also getting the most out of the transfer portal guys. Miami's transfer portal classes are pretty successful. They don't produce a lot of duds out of their portal classes. So when they do evaluate and assess talent out of the portal, they're really efficient with it, and they don't really make too many mistakes.
Yeah, and they're like, for example, they've like recruited Justin Scott, 5-star defensive lineman, and then for the 2025 class, they got Hayden Lowe, 5-star defensive end. So they're recruiting studs in a way that no other ACC team is right now. I think Clemson is still recruiting some, but they don't have the breadth. They don't have the coverage of talent that Miami has in terms of recruiting, and they don't have the depth either. Like, Miami's bringing in good classes. They're developing them. I mean, you mentioned Elijah Arroyo. He got hurt, I think, in 2023, kind of missed much of the year, then had a really amazing, if I'm being honest, 2024 season. And then the way Cam Ward played this year was much better than anything he showed consistently at Washington State or Incarnate Ward, where he came from.
And the thing about Miami that's also worth taking notice of is, I don't believe they're going to go down the rabbit hole of ever spending big money on getting a high school quarterback like Michigan did with Bryce Underwood. Not to say that that's a bad approach to take for those schools, but Miami's basically saying, we don't want to wait a year or two to develop a quarterback out of high school. Hell, we don't even know if these high school quarterbacks are even going to be good or not. Why waste the cash on those young gambles when we could get a proven guy like a Cam Ward or Carson Beck that has shown enough consistency in his previous stops or where he was at, that if you give him a great offensive line and great receivers, a good run game, he can not only produce at a really high level, give you a chance to win the conference and make it to the playoffs, but also he can improve his draft stock, which also makes you a premier destination for transfer quarterbacks, because a transfer quarterback can look at what Miami has done these last 2 years. Let's say Carson Beck is better than what he was last year. Let's say he reverts back to 2023 Carson Beck, right? And he ends up being a first-round draft pick again. That would be the second straight season Miami has produced 2 first-round quarterbacks now. Now you start to view Mario Cristobal in the light of maybe he's somewhat of a quarterback whisperer. Justin Herbert is in the league now, so he would have had 3 first-round quarterbacks at this point. This makes Miami now quarterback you in terms of the transfer portal. The program sells itself at that point. Now Mario, his recruiting is now a lot easier because the more this program continues to improve, the more it continues to sell itself. That's the appeal of taking a job like Miami.
Yeah,
when you get this program rolling, you feel me? It sells itself.
Yeah, because they have the resources and they have the recent history. And honestly, you know, they're kind of closer to a Big Ten or SEC program than they are to the average ACC program. Like they just are. They're closer to those 2 conferences than Clemson or Florida State are right now. I think that you know, Clemson has more recent history and pedigree, but Miami has been willing to be aggressive and, you know, dedicate the resources that need to be dedicated to do things. And I just don't know if there's anyone else like that in the ACC right now. But that's just my opinion, and that could easily change because Sweeney just started using the portal, and if they win big this year, who knows? I mean, there's a lot that can happen in a year, but ultimately, do you think he can fix Miami? Do you think he can bring them back to a high level, or no?
This is where I digress. I don't believe Mario Cristobal is the right head coach to resurrect the U. Dabo Swinney, he doesn't have to bring in all of these stat recruiting classes and portal classes to win. Clemson went to the ACC championship, yet they didn't have a better team than Miami, but they were a better team in games that they had to win against inferior opponents. Yeah, they dropped the game to Louisville and Georgia and South Carolina, but you know, everybody has a few down losses. But for Mario Cristobal, though, the lows are worse with him than what it is with Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney gets the most out of his personnel. Mario Cristobal is an elite talent acquirer, but he's not good of getting the most out of this talent come game days. He's an elite recruiter, but he's a poor game day coach. That's what holds him back. That's what's holding Miami back from getting to that next level. You lose to Georgia Tech. You lose to Syracuse. Those were unexcusable losses.
Yeah, Miami was up, 21-0 against Syracuse, and then they blew it. Wasn't that it?
Getting shredded by Honda McCord.
It was wow.
You got Syracuse head coach telling Dabo Swinney thank you. And what new age of college football now are these coaches now happy to help out another coach? What happened to the old school college football when we didn't give a damn if we helped you out? We aren't about to say, oh yeah, we're glad we helped you make it to the ACC championship. No, like, who cares about all that? You feel me? It's like
it's clicks and attention, and it's the fact that, you know, someone like Fran Brown, like at Syracuse, can basically use that as an advertisement to say, "Come play for me," because we can beat the good teams. And I think he's a really good coach. I think Syracuse long term, if they can somehow keep him, is going to have some consistent success.
And that's the issue. Fran Brown did just as much at Syracuse with way less resources, way less NIL money, just as what Mario Cristobal did at Miami this year. They both won 10 games, right?
If they both won 10 games with an easy schedule, defense was the issue. Of course, that's a very strong generalization. There are a lot of differences, but still, yeah, you're right. That's crazy.
Rhett Lashley. Miami fans, my issue with them when it comes to having discourse about Mario Cristobal is they're too biased towards the fandom. They can't separate the fandom from being able to properly evaluate what the head coach actually is because they're always so overly optimistic. I was overly optimistic at one point because I always thought every year Miami had the best team in the ACC, which was plausible, but the coaching was never on par. And the last couple of coaches that Miami has hired, it's been the same rinse, wash, and repeat cycle. You have a head coach that will peak at 9-10 wins and then crash and burn right back down to 6 and 7, flame out, and get fired. You know, Mario Cristobal, compared to the other coaches in the ACC, he's doing less with more. Rhett Lashley did more with less last year with a bunch of Miami's JV players. Every time a Miami player hits the portal, most of the times they're going to play for SMU. You might as well call them the SMU Hurricanes at this point. And for some reason, Rhett Lashley always squeezes all the juice out of them. You want to know what's funny? The only coordinator, the only coach who had Tyler Van Dyke playing good football was Rhett Lashley. Ever since he has left and hasn't been with Rhett Lashley until now, he hasn't been that good. Rhett Lashley is an excellent coach. Dabo Swinney's an excellent coach. Where would you rank Mario Cristobal among ACC coaches? He doesn't even crack
I know
my
that
top
off the top
five.
of my head. You want me to give you the list?
Go ahead. I can name a few.
If you include Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman is like way above Cristobal. But if you don't include Notre Dame, Bill Belichick, Jeff Brom, Rhett Lashley. I'm actually not high on Dabo Swinney at all as a game manager. I think he's a great culture guy, and I think he identifies talent well. But I think there are some game management stuff where it's like, whew, I still have him way above Mario Cristobal. History, better game manager. And honestly, it's only 1 year. I care the most about game management with a head coach because recruiting can simply be, especially now, just a difference in resources. I think Fran Brown is a better head coach than Mario Cristobal.
Dave Dorian at NC State, I think he's better than Mario Cristobal.
Cristobal's game management is among the worst in the country. It's James Franklin bad, except you could argue that it's even worse because Franklin at least beats all the teams he should beat and only has an issue with teams that have more talent or that are named Ohio State. Cristobal will lose to like Stanford, who doesn't win more than 4 games, or they will lose to, last year's Georgia Tech and this year's Georgia Tech, who only won 7 games, or Syracuse, who, Syracuse won 10 games, but they were not top 25 in power ratings, or, it's just, there is that kind of glass ceiling with him that he has never really broken through. Now, to be fair, he did win the Pac-12 in 2019 with Justin Herbert, so I got to give him credit there. But like, who do you think they should go to?
Mario has you ready for the big games. I'll give him that. Mario will always have you ready for the big games. I will never forget when he upset Ohio State a few years ago with that Boston College quarterback. I forgot what his name, Anthony Brown. You asked what I think of Miami.
Oh, where do you think they should go? Because you don't think that he's going to work out there. Where do you think they should go?
Rhett Lashley, easily. You go after Rhett Lashley. Rhett Lashley has a Miami pipeline, not just for the former Miami players, but he recruits that area incredibly well. He recruits Texas and Cali incredibly well. And he's a way better game day coach than what Cristobal was. Look at how fast SMU has quickly ascended under Rhett Lashley. They're having more success than they've ever had since before they got the death penalty when they were paying players. Now it's legal to do so. Do you know that they're paying to play in the ACC?
Yes. They're not taking any TV money because they wanted a seat at the big boys table. And that's a credit to their donors. In their first season,
in the Power 4 conference, they make it to the title game. They almost win it, and they make it to the CFP. Curt Cignetti, his first season at Indiana, not only led them to the playoffs, but led them to the greatest season of Hoosiers football. But yet, we got to wait 4 or 5 years for Mario Cristobal to turn Miami into a playoff contender, a national championship contender? How long does it take to rebuild a school like a Texas, a USC, a Miami, when the resources are already there? The recruiting proximity gives you a huge advantage. I'm just running out of patience with Mario Cristobal, Sam. I really am. That's why I don't believe in him. I see so many coaches now doing way more with less than what Mario Cristobal has at Miami. Kellen DeBoer had Washington in the national championship 2 years ago.
Yeah, his second year there.
With one of the lowest rated rosters to ever appear in a national title game. Washington and Michigan are the two recent teams in the last few decades to make it to a national title game despite not having a top 10 recruiting class or a top 10 roster in terms of team talent composite.
Yep. Yeah. And that's because both of their coaching staffs were great at development and they were great at game management. In fact, I would correct myself and say elite in both instances. And look, I think that it's different at each school. I think that, Indiana and SMU certainly benefited from some easier schedules for sure. But at the end of the day, Indiana was blowing out people left and right. And whenever they didn't have a massive talent disadvantage, they would beat that opponent because they were so well coached and put together and they knew what they wanted to do and they were well conditioned. And for SMU, it was somewhat similar. Like they got on the field with Clemson and Clemson was destroying them because, well, Clemson had a huge talent edge. But SMU nearly came back and nearly won, and SMU was dealing with a bunch of injuries, and yet they, fought through that adversity all season long. The power ratings would even say that SMU was a better team than Clemson at the end of the season, which is hilarious. And yet you have Miami, who has way more talent than those teams, and a lot more talent than most teams, not just in college football, but the Power Four. And it seems like when they need to win, they're walking on two left feet. I wanna end on this. Well, what am I doing here? Did I forget to export something? Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I forgot. I must have messed something up. Apologies to the viewers, but anyway, what I want to end on is, let's say they hire Rhett Lashley, or let's say they hire like a better head coach. And even if they don't, so this is where I'm really going with this. How much time are you going to give that new hire? But before that, how much time from here on out would you give Mario Cristobal?
Mario got this year of me. We about to find out a lot about Mario Cristobal week 1 because Marcus Freeman and the Fighting Irish are coming to town, baby. Then you got Florida coming up. You feel me? Pressure either bursts pipes or makes diamonds. Mario Cristobal has been at Miami long enough to where he has had enough time to get his last few recruiting classes on the field. All of those guys should be sophomores, upperclassmen. They should be high-level producers this year. You've been able to fix the weakest links of your program. You improve the entire coaching staff. You got a top-notch defensive coordinator that you took from Minnesota and Corey Heatherman.
Really
he
good
was
hire.
he was one of the most underrated defensive coordinators in college football last year. I thought Ohio State would have went after him, but I'm glad Miami got him. Overall, if Miami doesn't make it to the ACC championship or the college football playoffs,
You're out.
Mario Cristobal should be fired. It's playoffs a bust for him. At this point, you've been here long enough to where Miami should now be able to compete for a playoff spot. But there's some people that will push back on that, though. They will say, well, if Mario wins 9 games this year or 10 wins, he should keep his job because the program is still progressing. That shows me that maybe Miami's ceiling is no longer a national champion. Maybe it's unrealistic to ever expect Miami to get back to the level that they used to be during their heyday. Same thing with USC. Maybe they just had their moment and they now were just a flash in the pan of history. They're nostalgia. And we talk about Miami every year because of the nostalgia, because we want to know if they can truly get back to that level. But if you can't make it to the playoffs and the second weakest Power Four conference in college football, with the huge talent gap that you have compared to everybody else, it's an indictment on the coaching. It's playoffs or bust for Mario this year.
Yeah, and I think that USC is a different case because they play like in the Big Ten. Like they're not the Tiger. The Tiger is Ohio State. The Tiger's Oregon. Michigan has been more of a Tiger in recent memory by a mile than USC has. And what I mean by Tiger, this is just something I came up with because I think it's fun. I mean like the alpha feline, the alpha predator. The cat that can casually smack you and your face breaks out and bleeds and you're dead because they're that good. Miami should be that in the ACC with how they're recruiting, with the resources they have. They should be the ACC's Tiger, and you can't say that they are. So I absolutely get that. I mean, I can't really answer that question because I'm not a fan, so I don't have your viewpoint. But I will certainly say that I don't think that's how the administration views it right now. But then again, I think him being an alum probably gives him some protection, at least a little bit more protection than
Let me
most
ask you
others.
this. FSU or Miami, who's been more successful the last decade? Because I saw Josh Pate rank Miami ahead of FSU in his ACC program rankings, and I strongly had to push back against it. Florida State in the last decade in the ACC has won multiple ACC titles. They won the national championship. They've been to the college football playoffs multiple times. Yeah, they've had a down stretch, but even in the down stretch, they've still had a higher peak than Miami. A year ago, they just got snubbed out of the playoffs. They went undefeated in the regular season, won the ACC championship with their practice squad quarterback. So even in Florida State having a down 5 years, even when they had their best season, they did more than what Miami did in their best.
Did he say that? Did he measure it for the past decade? Because I only saw he measured it for like the past 4 years, but I also know that that's probably not entirely honest.
It was the last 4 years. He included recruiting, how well you develop talent, a lot of other metrics. So it's not just based off on the field performance per se. It's a lot of other factors. And you feel me? It was a respectable argument. It's just I still disagree with it because Miami hasn't had the same level of success Florida State has had. Even though Florida State had that awful season last year, they still did more than what Miami has accomplished during that span. You won the ACC title. Miami hasn't come close to doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly get that. I do. I mean, I saw his ACC program rankings, and I'd say that this is probably more future projection than past projection, but I'll say like after this year, I don't know where Clemson will be. Like I don't. And with Florida State, I think that Florida State this past year has shown that I don't think they have a foundation. I kind of think that they got to pull the plug on their current experiment, but that could be a conversation for another day.
Oh, trust me, that's a really good conversation.
Yeah, thank you for talking Miami with us, JT. I really appreciate it. I mean, I'll give some of my brief thoughts here before we move on. I really like where they're going overall. I think that they're getting better every year. I think there's a good chance that they'll be better this year. Maybe not in terms of ceiling, but in terms of they'll actually play complementary football. Not every game will be a shootout. At least I'd think that'd be the case with the DC upgrade, but sometimes it takes longer than a year for things to get situated. I just think that I always say on the channel, recruiting isn't everything. I think recruiting nowadays is a little bit overrated just because the websites and the services are incentivized to promote it so much. But it does matter a whole lot. And Miami is acing everyone else in the conference at recruiting. And they have like good position coaches. So those two things combined immediately give them a better future than the vast majority of the conference. But I do think that at some point they have to reach the college football playoff. They have to have success on a national level. You can't just be happy with 10 wins, 9 wins. You can't, especially in the ACC, because 10 wins, 9 wins is not going to get you in the playoffs every year like it will in SEC or Big Ten, where you get 10 wins, you're probably an automatic berth, unless you have this like Rutgers level easy schedule or Indiana level easy schedule or Missouri level easy schedule. 10 wins with Miami had them ranked behind like Alabama. It probably should have been ranked behind South Carolina, like for example. Speaking of the Big Ten and the SEC, I want to get some of your brief thoughts on who you think the top 4 Big Ten teams are. Whether that's you can do both if you want, like top 4 programs, top 4 teams entering next year, and then give me a team which can burrow their way in, a team that can enter that top 4 and push someone else out.
Top 4 teams right now in order. Number 1, Michigan. Number 2, Ohio State. I get called a Michigan hater a lot. Understandably, I get why I get called that, but you have had more success in Ohio State these last couple of years. You've owned them in the game. You've dominated the Big Ten every single year under Jim Harbaugh. Last year's a down
These
year.
are program rankings.
That. Yeah, so okay. I got Michigan right now because they've just been better these last couple of years than Ohio State. Ohio State's obviously number 2. Number 3, I got Oregon. I just feel like Oregon's a lot closer to winning a national championship than Penn State, because I believe that Dan Lanning, he's going to be in that Kirby Smart discussion or that Ryan Day discussion. Now he's going to be the one we start putting that pressure on. When are you going to start getting it done? You feel me? I feel like his time's going to come. Oregon is going to be able to get it done eventually. They're like Miami too. Not like Miami, but in terms of they're stacking talent. You feel me? Yes. Eventually, you got to break through. You got too much talent not to.
It's like Texas, too. Like, Texas is stacking elite recruiting classes upon elite recruiting classes.
Yeah. So those are my top 4. Teams that I like to break into that, I love Washington. Washington is the best-kept secret in this conference because you have Jedd Fisch, who is a hybrid coach in terms of he has a lot of experience coaching collegiately, but also in the NFL, and he runs his program somewhat in the capacity of an NFL franchise, but still incorporates collegiate elements. And there are plenty of coaches that get a lot of influence from Jedd Fisch. Bill Belichick, he got a little bit more accustomed to the college game and realized the success that you could have at this level now because of spending time at Washington with Jedd Fisch. The players that Jedd Fisch recruits, they're not always about your star rating. He's looking for guys that have NFL traits. Do you have NFL prototypical size at corner? Are you 5'10", 6 foot, 180 something pounds? Can you run 4.4, 4.5? I'm looking for these kinds of measurables at certain positions that have prototypical pro kind of measurables that I'm evaluating for. Jedd Fisch, with how he recruits, how he evaluates talent in the transfer portal, he quickly is going to have Washington not just competing for the Big Ten, but for national championships. Remember, when Washington has a good head coach, like with Kalen DeBoer, Chris Peterson, and the guy they had when they had their run in the 90s, they're still have
Nick Saban, Nick Saban's main mentor.
Yeah, like Washington's upside has always been national championship, but it's been overlooked because of the focus on the Big Four of the Big Ten. And nobody really pays that much attention to Washington because they're not as in your face as those other 4 programs ahead of them. But give them about 1 or 2 more years, they definitely will be making some noise in this conference. And look out for their sophomore quarterback that they have.
Williams.
He reminds me a lot of Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, as kind of more Kyler Murray because of the size. So, yeah, those are my top 4 programs, and that's a program I definitely think is on the rise. Indiana's in that conversation, too.
What about Nebraska?
Nebraska, I have them in the same tier I have USC. You've done everything well in terms of rebuilding the program, re-energizing the fan base. Lincoln Riley, you could say he did it way earlier than Matt Rule. 11 wins year 1. You falling off a little bit, but this year though, year 2 with D'Antlin, that all-star defensive staff they have, the players that they're going to be having on defense from recruiting in their second year, like Cameron Fountain, he's going to be a beast. But Nebraska, they're in that same tier because it's like you also have a pretty good coaching staff. You used the transfer portal really well, but now I got to see the results. And I don't have enough faith in Matt Rule right now to say that I believe Nebraska is going to take this monumental jump. I could still see them finishing around 7, 6, maybe 8 wins this upcoming season. I feel like 2026 could really be that year we see Nebraska make that big jump. You'll have Dylan Raiola in year 3. You'll have a lot more other players that came from the same recruiting class as Dylan Raiola entering upperclassman status. And I feel that's really when Nebraska is going to be able to scare this conference legitimately with Matt Rule. Matt Rule has always been a program builder, and it's always taken him a few years, but once he gets everybody, he gets it rolling.
Yeah. I mean, it's typically year 3 for him when they break through, and maybe that won't be the case here, but I think even if it isn't, I do believe they're on a good track. The Washington
I love their portal class, though. Hold on. Dane Key, oh my goodness. Nebraska got an absolute stud in Dane Key. Him and Barry and Brown were severely underutilized at Kentucky due to horrendous quarterback play. He is going to be one of the best receivers in the Big Ten this year. Elite speed, can take the top off of defense. He's great after the catch. Dane Key is a stud. Great portal class Nebraska brings in.
I'll keep that in mind. I mean, I saw his stats and I'm like, he did that well with Gavin Wimsatt and Brock Vandegrift at quarterback. that had to be the most pathetic QB room in the country. It was horrible.
Nebraska fans, I'm not gonna lie, y'all upside this year probably could be 9, maybe 10 wins. Y'all do have a really good transfer portal class. Y'all absolutely crushed it in the portal this year. Y'all been crushing it in recruiting, and it's just with the way the schedule is. I still feel it's going to be one more year. Nebraska could be what Florida is. We're a little bit. We're
schedule's
a year too early.
Pretty easy. I think they could win even 11 games. Look at their schedule. It's not the easiest. It's not Indiana caliber, but they don't play Ohio State on the road, for example. Like their only tough road game is Penn State late November, which I don't think they have a shot at winning. But outside of that, they can probably win every other game if they play to their talent level. And that would probably get them to Indy. If not, they'd be in the playoffs. So, yeah. One more thing before we move on here. What about your top 4 teams, just like very quickly, entering 2025? Like top 4 Big Ten teams, not just programs, but teams.
I got Ohio State. I got Penn State. I got Oregon. Man, give me I'm gonna go. Man, I love Washington.
Go with it.
I'm gonna go with
Michigan.
I'm gonna go with Michigan.
Michigan has questions. Indiana has questions. I mean,
I'm gonna go Washington.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I found myself in doing research. It's pretty obvious that, Penn State's returning everyone. They have to be there. Oregon and Ohio State have the most talent, but they also lose a lot. So if they underperform, I don't think it should be as big of a surprise as it might be to some, but they should still be in that top 3 based off of coaching, development, recruiting, and some of the star players they bring back. But outside of that, you could have Michigan at 4. You could have Nebraska at 4. You could have Indiana at 4. Yeah, you can have USC. I think USC, it's just like last year. They played to their ceiling. They're a national title contender, but they have like a lot of things that could also go wrong at the same time.
How you feel about Illinois, though? Because Illinois got Luke Altmaier coming back. You talk about improvement. They got the most improved player award. He deserves it.
I think Illinois has a chance to reach the playoff and have one of their best, if not their best seasons in school history. I think their problem is, where are the aliens? Not even where are the aliens, where are the potential aliens? Like, Michigan doesn't have any aliens coming back, but they have a lot of guys who could be aliens. Ohio State loses a lot of guys and returns some aliens. They also have a lot of guys who can evolve into being... Alien is a translation for like all-American caliber player, or even better than that. Illinois returns a lot of guys who are good college players, some of whom are future NFL players, but I think their upside is a bit questionable. I think they'll be a good team, though, and I think that with the way they coach, I really love their offensive coordinator. I think that their defensive coordinator is really growing into his role there. His name's escaping me here. Hold on a second. Oh yeah, Aaron Henry. I think Aaron Henry's getting better every year. I really like Barry Looney Jr. as OC. I think they can they can find a way to win 11 games. They can upset some of the big teams that they play. But is this a team that can win a playoff game once they get there? I'll have to see it before I believe it, for example. But yeah, I think it's a really good list. You got 3 of the obvious ones, then the bold one, and the bold one's not top 3. The bold one's just a 4th. And that's what I want to talk about next, is just, why do you think Washington can succeed long term, and not just long term, but also this season? Because I saw your playoff predictions, and you have Washington kind of sneaking in as the 12th seed. So why do you think they can win big in 2025? Because their schedule's pretty hard. If you're picking them to go to the playoffs, they're going to earn a big win here or there.
Washington has one of the best coaches in college football. Jedd Fisch gets the most out of his entire personnel. They overachieved last year. They won 6 games with a team that only returned less than 1% of returning production off a national championship team. So they overachieved with the circumstance he inherited. He couldn't bring in a normal portal class because he had to take advantage of the second portal window, right?
Yes.
Based off what he did last year, especially with how promising their young quarterback and Desmond Williams looked.
Yeah, Damon Williams.
Yeah, I love this man's game. He had 8 touchdowns, only 1 interception. He was a force on the ground as well. He reminds me a lot of Kyler Murray. And he easily could be the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. The talent's there. Jedd Fisch did a great job with Noah Fafita. You saw how he fell off the cliff and how far Washington has fallen off ever since his departure. That shows you how good of a coach Washington has. And we said earlier, when Washington has the right coach, the ceiling for this program is always national championship. When you look at Washington's schedule, yes, it is going to be really difficult. The thing with Washington, though, is they're one of those teams that you just can't look at certain games that they're going to play and mark them down as a guaranteed L. There's a good chance that they could be Oregon this year. Oregon may have the better team, but they have the better team when they played against Kalen DeBoer. You feel me? And Dan Lanning lost them twice that same season despite being the favorite. So with Jedd Fisch, if he continues to climb up the ladder of the coaching hierarchy and he ends up getting lured to a bigger appealing job, then I don't think Washington's future is going to be that promising, because I don't know if they can find another head coach as good as what he is. But if they keep him around, the trajectory this season with what Damon Williams is going to be in year 2, being the full-time starter, you return Jonah Coleman. Oh, my goodness. Is he not the best returning running back in the Big Ten? this season?
I think Nicholas Singleton is better, and I also think Darius Taylor is. But those are some of the best running backs in the country. Like he's there. He could be the best in the Big Ten. Like Jonah Coleman's very impressive. He willed that team to some wins last year where it's like if they don't have him, I don't know if they beat Michigan if they have him. And Michigan's offense was atrocious. Like you're right. They kind of did overachieve. There were some frustrating losses, but they also had some high moments and ultimately went bowling. And with all they lost, I don't think that's a failure.
And then they play Ohio State at home. You know, you play Oregon at home. Your toughest games are on the road against Michigan. On the road against Wisconsin could be a little bit tricky. I don't know how they're going to look this year, but I still believe in Luke Fickell. And you got Illinois at home. So, yeah, you got tough teams on your schedule, but you get to play them at home. And winning on the road in Washington is tough. A lot more difficult than what you may think. Their home field advantage doesn't get talked about enough. The thing with the 12-team playoff format that's being overlooked, when I see these playoff projections, you see a bunch of the same teams from last year. Like, we got 12 spots available, folks. We're going to have at least 5, maybe 6 new playoff teams every single year. So with the way the format is perfectly set up, Washington now has an easier path to make it in than what they did when it was at 4. All they have to do is at least finish with 10 wins, which I definitely think is plausible. I feel like they're going to be even better than what they were last year on the offensive line. For them to win the amount of games they won, despite not being that good up front on both sides of the football, is a testament to how good of a coach Jetfish is. Like, I got a lot of faith in Washington being a playoff team because of Jetfish and how favorable their schedule is. You get to play the best teams at home.
I'll have to look into it more. I have not researched. I kind of saved them a little bit for last in my Big Ten research, but I mean, I think Damon Williams Jr. is a huge upgrade over Will Rogers. I think that getting Denzel Boston back is huge. He's one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. Legitimately could be the best. I think that the defensive side is what's interesting for me, and I think that's what's ultimately going to determine the year outside of the offensive line, because, you know, you have Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston, Damon Williams Jr. That's one of the best three-headed monsters. It could be one of the best in America. It's certainly one of the better ones in the Big Ten. But they lost, you know, some players with Steve Belichick to North Carolina in the portal. They also lost, you know, their coach, which doesn't help. They brought in Ryan Walters, who I think is a really good defensive coordinator, but, you know, last year was a lot of patchwork, and it's only year 2. It's not year 3. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it is an interesting team to be high on for sure. I don't hate it. I actually, the more you talk about it, the more I kind of think it could be a little bit like Florida, where you have a really good QB and a team that has some experience and talent. But maybe that's a bad analogy. So
watch out for the portal class too. He got a few more Arizona players following him along.
Dacario Davis, for example, really good corner.
Hi, you know I was about to bring him up. Yep. You also got a really good safety out of Northern Arizona as well, or NIU, something like that. Yeah, he's a stud too. He was one of the best players out of the portal. Like, Washington, with Jetfish having the NFL approach, that's why I feel like they'll build to make a playoff run, because when you have an NFL approach, it's not about building for the long term as well. You feel like if you can get the right guys in to fit your scheme, maybe you could strike iron and make a run. You know, it's always going to be a few random teams that come out of nowhere that surprise us. I feel like the Huskies could be that team this year.
It's interesting for sure, and, you know, it's only February. It's not even March yet, so there's a lot of time to kind of gauge these things out. And at the end of the day, there is going to be a team that makes it that no one will expect, like Indiana. I don't think anyone saw Indiana scoring close to 50 points per game and having, like, the best rushing defense in the entire country. Like, no one saw that coming. It was absolutely incredible, just as an example, and maybe Washington can be that. in 2025. Last but certainly not least, I want to talk about some programs who, based off your playoff projections or how we've, talked about certain things in football, that you think can win it all. First and foremost, why do you think Ohio State can win the 2025 national championship? Do you think that they can repeat, that they can win 2 in a row? And outside of Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, what do you think are some of the advantages that they have?
Ryan Day is an elite head coach, folks. You can't deny it anymore. Stop the hate train. With Ryan Day, Ohio State is always going to be in the conversation to win it all.
Agreed.
And I feel like for Ryan Day, winning that first national championship could open up the floodgate for him to go somewhat on a run. Remember when Kirby Smart finally got over the hump, he won back-to-back. Ohio State, with how they've recruited, I love their quarterback situation. You can't go wrong with either option with what they have coming in. You always recruit well on the defensive line. The hiring of Matt Patricia, I believe, is going to work out. Matt Patricia is a highly respected NFL defensive coordinator. He has a high pedigree. He has a high football IQ, and he does a really good job of maximizing a lot out of guys that have athleticism at defensive back, which is what Ohio State normally tends to have. Ohio State always has freakish defensive backs, some of the most athletically gifted DBs in the country. Matt Patricia, yeah, he likes to run, different variations. He can run both 3-4 and 4-3, but he also likes to run a lot of base nickel, which requires you to have defensive backs that are physical, that are willing to come down and tackle. And last year, the cornerback play for Ohio State wasn't that good, in my opinion. Egbanosa, Denzel Burke, they were wildly inconsistent. I feel like the safety play of Ransom and Caleb Downs on the back end helped them make up for their limitations.
Agreed.
This year, I love what they have in the cornerback room. I feel like cornerback could be an improvement this year. I don't really think they had good cornerbacks last year. They weren't garbage, you feel me? But they definitely weren't great. They had their moments.
They were the only reason why that defense may not have been like the best defense in college football history.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
What scares me about Ohio State is, how do we not know if this team is going to pick off from where they left off from last year's playoff run? Last year's playoff run, they played their best football. When they lost to Michigan, we thought they were done. We thought their season was about to tank. Ryan Day was about to have an ugly ending in the first round, second round, either Oregon or Tennessee. And yet, they just slaughtered everybody. I'm talking about they're on everybody's top as soon as the opening possession. If they pick up with that level of play right out the gates, they definitely could repeat.
Absolutely.
I know it's going to be hard to continually always be a national title contender with the depth issues that you have because of the transfer portal and whatnot. But Ohio State just has so many resources where they won't have too many years like that. They are perfectly positioned to go on the run. You don't worry about returning production for Ohio State. They are a football factory. They don't rebuild. They reload.
Yeah, I think you don't worry about returning production with Ohio State unless it's a position where they haven't excelled at. What you worry about is the type of player that they either bring in or bring back, because they're that good. I mean, I have not always picked Ohio State to win games. That's because I think I'm objective, and I also think that Ohio State under Day, like really everyone else, has had some issues, and I think their issues have not exactly helped them in the Big Ten. Like last year, they win it all, but they lose 2 games because mainly issues they have on the offensive line in terms of depth and kind of the conflict between philosophies and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly. But the minute they figured that stuff out, well, it's no different from what we've seen with Day in 2020 against Clemson or 2022 against Georgia, where, if Knowles is in his second year instead of first year, they probably beat Georgia by double digits. He's an elite coach, and I think he might be the best or one of the best tactician coaches in all of college football. It's very impressive what they've done.
And to build on that point, even if the Matt Patricia hire doesn't work out, Ryan Day is such an excellent coach to where he can overcome a bad hire, like how Kirby Smart and Nick Saban have been able to do in years past.
Yeah. Oh, he'll find a new elite DC. And if not for that, not for that, because he will no matter what, but let's say the defense isn't good this year, which I don't think will happen, but let's say it's a total bust. Their offense is still going to be pretty good. Like they can win shootouts with Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin and Max Clear at tight end, which was a really nice addition. So I like Ohio State entering this coming season as a team that's going to remain in that conversation. Glad to see that we're on the same page. Looking at Oregon, why can Oregon win it all? What non-negotiable does Dan Lanning have that few or no one else have in college football that can help him win Oregon's first national title?
Oregon's last few recruiting classes have been the best in program history. Literally, like, they lose a lot of production from the secondary. But literally, like, 8 of the guys they recruited from the last couple of recruiting cycles are the best, highly rated defensive backs they've ever had in the history of the program. This is the most talent that Oregon has ever had on the roster. They are recruiting at as high as a level as they've ever had. We are seeing Oregon reach peaks that they've never hit before under Dan Lanning. You know, yeah, you can't joke about them always coming up short, not having a national championship. But in terms of programs who have consistently always been on the forefront of being in that national title discussion, being in the playoff discussion, Oregon has been one of the more consistent in college football. They are getting to a point where they got way too much talent to not believe they can win it all every single year. You feel me? You're stacked everywhere. 5 stars across the board. The
Absolutely.
blue chip talent ratio is insane. Like, I mean, I think it's a little bit crazy to not say Oregon doesn't have a shot to win it every single year at this point. Dan Lanning is now he's the new Ryan Day. Like with Kirby Smart, you know, we were asking, how long is it going to take? When are you going to get over the hump? Eventually, he got over the hump. It took him around, I think it was year 6, year 7 to get his first national title. Same thing for Ryan Day. You know, it's taking him a few years. With Dan Lanning, then these next 3 years, I guarantee Oregon's going to win a national championship. They are recruiting out of this world. Phil Knight is giving them unlimited NIL, Sam. Every time a team accuses somebody of tampering, Oregon is always involved in it. You feel me? But it's like, can you blame them? I think a big reason why Matt Rule doesn't want to have a spring game anymore, because he's afraid Oregon's going to buy his best players that show out in the game. You feel me? Like, they can buy anybody they want. And Dan Lanning is a cerebral coach. You can get mad at him taking advantage of the rules, you know, in that Ohio State win during the regular season. But that's great coaching. Great coaches find loopholes. You feel me? If you're not always pushing the envelope or trying to bend the rules as much as you can bend them to win, you're not trying to win. That's what great coaches do. That's what great strategists do. You got Will Stein, one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. You know, they also got one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, and he's only 29 years old, and yet he's
Terry is really elite.
Yes, he's coached
some of the best of the best.
Sam, he's coached 2 straight Jim Moore Award finalists. Come on now, like, Oregon at this point, I'm asking myself, it's not a matter of if they can win a national championship. It's a matter of when.
Agreed.
When are they going to do it then, JT? I don't know. They got to do it eventually. They got too much not to.
I bet you it's sometime in the next 5 years with how, like, they just out-recruited Ohio State, like this past class. Like, especially when you factor in the portal. They just out-recruited Ohio State, like, literally. Not that Ohio State had a bad class. They got everyone, I think, almost everyone they wanted. But Oregon brought in an average recruit that was rated higher. And then the previous year, they brought in more bodies. So They're recruiting at that Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, and now Texas level. And I think because Dan Lanning is a top 5 head coach, as long as they can figure out the defense, which I think Tosh Lupoy at that point is this team's Achilles heel, I think they'll win it all. I think that one of the greatest what-if stories of the 2024 preseason is what if instead of Jim Knowles going to Penn State, a team that is trying to win it all, a team that wants to be what Ohio State has been, what if Oregon was the team who poached Jim Knowles? That's the number 1 program in the country for the next 5 or 10 years or however long he's around. Like, seriously. So Oregon is there. And I think the non-negotiable they have is really their offensive line. It's the talent they're bringing in. But with all their losing, I understand if people think this is going to be kind of a rebuilding year because they haven't had, 4 classes in a row with elite talent. Not saying that's going to happen. I still think they're going to be good. But there is that off chance that just with how much they're losing that, maybe they'll come back down to earth a little bit for just a temporary year.
It definitely could happen. It definitely could happen. But I will say this. Oregon is more so like football factory, like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, where you don't worry about the return of production because even if you look at their recruiting classes, if they're not sold on the recruits, they're just going to buy up the best players in the transfer portal. Like their transfer portal class, yeah, it's small, but everybody they got is probably going to be an instant plug-and-play starter. And that leads me to a question I have about you. What the hell went wrong with last year's Purdue team? Because literally they have so many players off last year's squad that were rated in the top 100 of the transfer portal player rankings, and yet they were awful. Like, what the hell was Brian Walters doing? Malpractice?
It was bad. It's something that I identified in the Purdue spring game that I actually think really aged well. Purdue is huge in the trenches, or at least they were. Like, they had a lot of good offensive linemen and defensive linemen. I think the problem is Ryan Walters was running a scheme that required way too much of his DBs and linebackers, so the secondary was awful. If the secondary and linebackers are bad, your defensive linemen can essentially be turned into decoys by anyone who's better than you. They're just eating up blocks. That's it. And then offensively, they were disgusting. Like, quarterback play was bad with Hudson Card. They had no receivers anyone cared about because Deion Burks left for Oklahoma. Max Clare was a good tight end, but he wasn't a Tyler Warren. He probably wasn't even a Colston Loveland. And consequently, it's not like they couldn't just feed him all game and win games. And they had a good running back in Devin Mockabee, who they'll have back for another year. But it was just bad coaching, bad decision-making, awful QB play, awful defense. They had a lot of good individual players, though. And, USC got DJ Wingfield. I know that Texas got one of their D tackles. I know that
Oregon got this dude who
Dylan
was
Thieneman.
Yeah, a lot of people actually say he was the best player in the portal. Like that's why I brought up Indiana or Purdue, because I wanted to tie it back to Oregon, because like this Dylan Thieneman, yeah, he's an absolute monster. He can do everything. Play in the box, play coverage. Like, I love what he's going to do at Oregon. How do you see him being able to improve this defense with his versatility?
I think that with what they're doing in the portal, what happened in the Rose Bowl, I'm not going to say it'll never happen again, because I think a lot of that was on Lupoy. I think if they have a better DC, I think they're probably able to force some punts on Ohio State, even with how well they play. Talent is not Oregon's problem. Even last year on defense, when their DBs were a little bit small and a lot of them were in the portal, like some of that stuff was just Lupoy being a complete moron with scheme. I mean, it's why Alabama kind of unplugged his headset in 2018, even when they were winning. He couldn't call the defense. But anyway, they're going to upgrade their talent. They're going to upgrade their ceiling. They're, I think, more importantly, going to upgrade their floor. I don't think, again, unless they play Ohio State and unless Lupoy once again calls a moronic game, I don't think you're going to see their secondary get torn apart like it did last year at times. I also think that what happened against Penn State, where Penn State ran for 1 billion yards on them, the only team that's going to do that might be Penn State this year because of how much they bring back and how much better they should be with Kotelnicki in year 2. But you're not – their defense will just be better. And I think more importantly it'll be the floor because Lupoy is still the DC. I really think they need to upgrade and move on from him. I thought that Rose Bowl game was a catastrophe. Like, yes, Oregon's offense was woefully underprepared, but the defense could have gotten more stops. Like, come on, man. Like, it was horrible. It looked like Georgia TCU, except, no, not except. It looked like that both on the field and off the field. Like, Oregon's coaches looked like TCU's coaches, where they're just kind of like,
no way. I'm not going to lie. Wasn't that us all, though? Wasn't that us all? Because who was expecting that?
I think that some either very biased Ohio State fans or people who understandably so were like very low on Lupoy kind of expected something like that to happen, but not to the degree that
this was the most anticipated rematch of college football, and it was an absolute bludgeoning. I'm talking about
it was a disappointment.
I can't believe
it was bad.
The destruction that we saw in Pasadena. Sam, like Jeremiah Smith has finally turned 19 now?
I don't know. Think so.
You can't use the jokes anymore. Man, listen, I don't know why Oregon didn't go after him, but they definitely learned their lesson because they got, I think his name's DeCorian
Moore. I don't know if he'll be as good as Smith, but I think he might be an instant impact player his freshman year.
He's going to be an instant impact player, in my opinion. He might not be Jeremiah Smith good, but I was watching some highlights he had. He was mossing guys and triple coverage. I was like, you know, these new age recruits that are coming out, they're a lot bigger and stronger at a lot younger age. Like, you look at Bryce Underwood, like this dude, Sam, you're like 6'4", aren't you?
No, I'm 6'3", 6'2". Underwood's 6'4", 200-something pounds of, like, pure muscle.
At 17. What the hell are they feeding these kids? That's why I'm saying, like, when I look at Michigan, I get called a hater, but I really am optimistic about the outlook of this program. Jim Harbaugh has a habit of leaving places better than where he found them. Stanford, he left them David Shaw. Sharon Moore, what he did the final 2 games of last year, the bowl win against Bama. Don't tell me bowl games don't matter. That bowl win definitely gave the program way more confidence in Sharon Moore moving forward, especially coming off that big win in the game. And now with them willing to spend as much as what Ohio State has spent in NIL, I expect Michigan to be right back in that conversation.
Amen. And last but not least, before we let you go, and thank you again for coming on, I want to talk about why you think Texas can win it all. Any non-negotiables they have, your thoughts on Texas entering 2025.
I'm going to dive with this storyline. You have the quarterback prodigy in Arch Manning. You know, if there ever was a guy who could really officially stamp Texas as being back by winning a national championship, it's him. He has everything. The arm strength is there. The decision-making is there. He's a way better athlete than what I thought he would be. And he's had time to sit behind Quinn Ewers, learn and develop. We know Texas has just as good as a roster as anybody. And they play Ohio State. They play Ohio State early this season. So we're going to find out early about them. But that could be a potential national championship game. I look at Texas as a team that has the capability of possibly finishing with a perfect record in the regular season, and possibly they run the table in the playoffs with how good Arch Manning is, along with what's around them. Steve Sarkisian with Arch should lead to better red zone efficiency. That was their biggest issue, and that's the non-negotiable that I have with Steve Sarkisian. The red zone offense has to improve. That's been his biggest weakness, not just at Texas, but as a play caller in general. At USC, Washington, the red zone offense stunk. At Atlanta, the red zone offense was a reason that led to his firing. So Steve Sarkisian getting the red zone offense right is going to be something that has to happen during the course of this offseason if Texas is going to be able to win a national championship. But with Arch Manning and the receivers, the offensive line that he's going to have, how good that defense is going to be, like Texas, they should be right there with Ohio State for winning the national championship. I just am a huge believer in Arch Manning. I love the Nepo babies, and if you love keeping up with football bloodlines, look at Notre Dame. Like, they got like so many like sons of NFL players. It's crazy. But Texas, they should win the national championship this year. This is their time. And plus, the SEC,
Even
they
with all they
desperately need
lose,
somebody. Texas is just like Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia. They reload. Like, they're buying up everybody in the portal that they want. They can steal your best player off your team if they want to. You feel me? They can steal any of your high quality backups. Like, Texas has recruited so well to the point where, like, you don't worry about the return of production. Hell, last year, they did return a really good offensive line. You had Kelvin Banks, but, they still lost a good amount of production. You lost 2 All-Americans on the defensive line. So for every good program is going to have to reload. Not
yes.
Everybody's going to be as deep because of the portal. But Texas overall, like, I really don't know how they don't win a national championship this year. They actually are my national championship pick.
Well, good for you, honestly. I mean, I don't think it's a bad pick at all. I think that they've recruited at a high enough level, developed at a high enough level, and they have the staff continuity. Staff continuity is something that even the best programs can't always escape. I mean, it's the same thing with returning production, but still, it helps to have one of them checked off if the other one isn't, because like Texas loses basically everyone on offense that was a key contributor outside of, Contravion Wisner and Ryan Wingo and one of their guards. And then on defense, they lose a lot. They bring back a lot too, but it helps that, they kept their coordinators. They, have their head coach. They kept Kyle Flood, who's probably their best assistant coach or one of their best. Yeah, Texas can win it all in 2025. I completely agree with that. And I do think that they can achieve something that they didn't last year. They can win the SEC. That would be
They've been to the semifinals the last 2 years.
Yeah, why can't they be back there again? Exactly. Well, thank you for coming on, JT. I really appreciate it. And everyone, before we get off here, make sure to check out JT Sports on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. You can search him up, give him a follow, give him a sub, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when he posts. And also, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to College Football with Sam, and hit the notification bell. And also join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we talk college football all the time. Thank you so much to my Patreon members for sponsoring this video. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kind of Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Josh Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Again, check out my merchandise store, Discord server, and Patreon page to support the channel, whether it's for free in terms of conversation with the Discord server or monetarily for the merchandise store and Patreon page. The links to those are in the description or the pinned comment. I'll see you guys very soon. Have a fantastic day.